You felt sorry for him. That is the entire premise of this video. And it happened to you last week at the hardware store or the DMV or standing behind him in line at the pharmacy. Let's call him Walter because he needs a name for this to land the way it should. But stay because you were wrong about him. And the way you were wrong explains almost everything about how money actually works. There is a moment coming later involving his own brother that proves exactly how far he took this. Hold on to that. Picture him, 61 years old, driving a 2011 Toyota Corolla with a crack in the windshield he has never bothered to fix. He wears the same fleece vest to the hardware store every single Saturday, the kind you can buy for $19 at any big box store. He asks the cashier for a 5-cent discount on a scratched can of paint and waits patiently while she checks with a manager. You watched that exact scene and felt something close to pity. A grown man negotiating over a nickel. You went home and did not think about him again because there was nothing left to think about. He looked exactly like what you assumed he was. Or so you thought. Walter has $2,300,000 in a brokerage account he opened in 1994 and has not touched since, except to add to it, quietly, every single month for 31 years. Read that number again. He buys the same brand of coffee every week, the one that comes in a plastic canister. Not because $2 million requires it, but because he genuinely does not taste much difference and has never seen the point in paying for one. His kitchen counter is laminate, chipped slightly near the sink, the same counter that was there when he bought the house in 1989. He has been offered a kitchen renovation loan twice by his bank and declined both times, not because he could not afford it, but because the kitchen still works exactly the way a kitchen is supposed to. Here is the tension nobody resolves for you. Looking rich and being rich are not the same skill, and in most cases they are actively opposite skills, competing for the exact same dollar every month of your life. Two skills, $1, rarely both. Nobody teaches you this directly. You absorb it instead slowly from advertising, from social feeds, from television shows, where the successful character always drives something German and wears something with a visible logo. By the time you're old enough to earn money yourself, you already have a fully formed picture of what wealth is supposed to look like, and almost none of that picture came from anyone who actually has it. Think about where your specific mental image of a rich person actually came from. Probably a movie, or a music video, or an influencer standing in front of a rented mansion for exactly the length of one video shoot. None of those images were built by people showing you their real balance sheet. They were built by people who understood that looking wealthy sells far more effectively than being wealthy, and that the two audiences for those two things rarely overlap. This is the machine, and it is not a conspiracy, just an incentive. Every company that sells a luxury car, a designer bag, a premium watch, profits directly from you associating their product with the internal state you actually want, which is security, respect, or freedom. The product cannot give you that state. It can only borrow the appearance of someone who already has it, rent it to you for the price of a monthly payment, and move on to the next customer. You have felt that borrowed feeling before. The specific lift of driving a nicer car for the first week, before it becomes just a car again. That lift is real, and it is also the most expensive feeling you will ever purchase, because it fades in days and the payment does not. The man in the fleece vest figured this out decades ago, possibly without ever articulating it in these words. He noticed that the feeling faded and the payment stayed, so he stopped buying the feeling entirely, and redirected that same money somewhere it would still be working for him 30 years later. Here are the actual tells, the ones that matter because the fleece vest and the cracked windshield are not really the tells at all. The real tell is what happens when something breaks. Walter does not panic when the water heater dies. He has an account for exactly this, and pays for it the same week, without a single conversation about financing. No panic, no financing, no story to tell anyone. The real tell is boredom with the topic of money itself. He does not bring it up, does not compare, does not perform interest in the stock market at parties, because the topic simply stopped being interesting to him around year 15. The real tell is privacy, the kind that looks almost strange to people who grew up believing wealth should be visible. He has never once mentioned the balance of that account to anyone outside his immediate family, including people who have known him for 20 years. Not one time, not even close. This creates a real cost, and it is worth naming honestly instead of pretending the quiet path is only noble and never lonely. He has sat through conversations where a coworker complained about being unable to afford a vacation, knowing he could fund that vacation without noticing the withdrawal, and said nothing, because saying something would change every future conversation they ever have. That silence is a genuine weight. Choosing invisibility means choosing to be occasionally misunderstood, mistaken for someone struggling, someone to feel sorry for in a hardware store parking lot, and accepting that misunderstanding as the price of the thing he actually wanted. Here is the moment I promised you earlier. There was a specific afternoon years ago when Walter's own brother assumed he needed help with a car repair bill and quietly offered to cover it. Walter let him believe that was true. He paid him back in small installments over 4 months just to keep the story consistent, and never once corrected the record. He has thought about that afternoon more than once, and still is not entirely sure it was the right call. That uncertainty is part of the actual cost of this path, not a footnote to it. You have made a version of that trade too, somewhere smaller, a decision nobody saw that made you look less impressive to someone in the moment, in exchange for something that mattered more to you privately. That is the same instinct in miniature. There is a generational piece to this that rarely gets said out loud. His children grew up assuming a certain baseline of financial calm was simply how families operated, because a house where money is never treated like an emergency raises people who do not treat it like an emergency either. That is not something you can hand someone in a lump sum after you die. It has to be absorbed slowly, over decades of ordinary Tuesdays where nobody panicked about a bill. And that kind of inheritance cannot be spent, lost, or divided the way money can. His daughter is 34 now with her own modest apartment, and her own boring, automatic contribution leaving her account every month because she watched the mechanism work for 30 years before she ever needed to use it herself. Nobody sat her down and gave her a lecture about compound interest. She simply grew up in a house where the water heater breaking was never a crisis, and some part of her nervous system learned that lesson before she was old enough to understand the vocabulary for it. Here is what the cultural machine gets backwards, completely and by design. It teaches you to look for wealth in the driveway, the wrist, the label inside the collar. Actual wealth is almost never visible there, because the moment money becomes visible, it has usually stopped compounding and started performing instead. And those are two very different uses for the exact same dollar. The next time you feel that flicker of pity for someone in a worn fleece vest, arguing over a nickel at a hardware store checkout, sit with the discomfort of not knowing which version of him you are actually looking at. You cannot tell from the outside anymore. That used to be a reliable signal. It stopped being one a long time ago, and most people never got the memo. None of this required Walter to start rich. He wasn't born with the account, or the house, or the discipline. He started at 26 with nothing but a paycheck and a decision to stop performing wealth he didn't have yet, which is the same decision available to anyone starting exactly where he started. Nobody was watching Walter build any of this. There was no audience for the 31 years of automatic contributions, no witness to the version of him at 30 who chose the modest apartment over the impressive one, no camera on the Tuesday he decided the feeling from a new car was not worth the payment attached to it. No audience, no witness, no camera, which is exactly why it worked. If you have ever been misjudged for looking like you had less than you did, subscribe. Next time, we look at the exact moment people abandon this path, usually around year 7, right when the invisible part is finally about to become undeniable.